Welcome to the SABC News. We are having a sit-down with the retired Chief Justice, Judge Raymond Zondo. And of course, he is here, and I think he is starting to feel that he indeed is a pensioner. But as you know, if you are a judge for life. So we'll be speaking about a range of issues. So he has been at the Constitutional Court for 12 years. You'd recall that if you serve at the Court, you can't serve for more than 12 years. So if, let's say, you join the bench much later in life, you can't go beyond 70 years. So he has been the judge there. And then in 2017, he was appointed the Deputy Chief Justice. And then, of course, in 2022, I think in April, he was then made the Chief Justice. So he's here with us, and then he's going to be reflecting on his journey, because a couple of days ago, he officially retired as the law requires. Retired or former Chief Justice, welcome to the SABC.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here.
Well, I'm glad we're able to agree that we have this chat.
Yeah. I couldn't say no to the public broadcaster.
Oh, thank you very much. To start off this discussion, Judge Zondo, you've been a judge for much longer than the 12 years that I've just spoken about. You've been
27 and a half years.
27 and a half years. That's quite a long time.
Yeah.
And then clearly you've seen so much happening. Just the highlight of your career from the 27 years that you have served.
Well, I think there are a number of highlights, but one of the most recent was the inauguration of the president, over which I presided, and chairing the National Assembly first meeting of the National Assembly of Parliament after the elections, and presiding over the election of the Speaker, Deputy Speaker, the Speaker, and the President, and then subsequently the inauguration of the President. Of course, I also saw in members of the cabinet and deputy ministers. That was one of the most recent. But of course, being appointed judge president of the Labour Appeal Court and Labour Court when I was 39 years old was quite significant also. And being appointed as the Deputy Chief Justice, being appointed as chairperson of the State Capture Commission, and of course being given the special honor and privilege of being the Chief Justice of the Republic was also a very important highlight.
Oh yes, indeed. I mean, I think that's probably the reason why we're speaking to you. Yeah. Because you've just retired. Yeah. Does it feel like you've retired?
Well, it does feel like, because I wake up in the morning and remember that I don't have to go to work. So it's a good feeling.
What about the body clock? What about the natural instinct that it's about time to go to work?
I would kind of wake up and then remember I don't have to go to work, so I can sleep further.
Oh, wow. I guess that is the advantage of serving and then, of course, getting to this point.
Yeah.
But on to some more important issues, Judge. What is it that you'd say, as you live, it's something you should have done, but somehow you didn't?
Well, I'm not sure that there is something that I say I should have done but didn't, because I think things that needed to be done, I played my part. But what would happen is that in respect of a number of things, as Chief Justice, you have to rely on the other arms of state, such as the executive, in order to finish certain things. But if the executive is not coming on board or doesn't feel as passionate as you do about a certain issue, they are taking their own time. You then won't, be able to complete it within a certain time, So, but from your side, you are satisfied that you did all that was expected of you. The reason why you didn't accomplish it is simply because somebody else was taking their own time. So I don't think that there is something that I can say I should have done and didn't do, yeah.
When it comes to the executive, I think you've been very critical, very, very openly in terms of certain aspects of how they do the work. In fact, I think that even relates to, I think the funding.
Institutional independence, yes.
So
Yeah.
that appears to be one thing that you've been very strong about.
Yes.
So as you engaged with your
Yeah.
colleagues,
Yeah.
so what is their attitude towards what you've been saying?
Well, I mean, the executive, I had a meeting with the president on the 13th of December last year in regard to the issue of the institutional independence of the judiciary. And I thought that we had a very pleasant meeting. It was very promising. I came out of that meeting, full of hope. But we were meant to have further meetings, but they didn't take place. So I'm leaving without having been able to have further meetings to try and make progress on the issue of institutional independence of the judiciary. It may be that in part it was because there were elections, but I do believe that if there was sufficient commitment to advance this, to deal with this issue, I do believe that we could have had some meetings which would have enabled us to take this issue forward, particularly because the executive knows that there was a period of 10 years when they kept us waiting as the judiciary on this issue. We had, under the former Chief Justice Mzwandile, in 2013, we had submitted to them proposals as to what needed to be done in order for the judiciary of South Africa to be given institutional independence. And they were supposed to respond, but they took 10 years.
Maybe to an ordinary man and woman in the street, what do you mean by institutional independence, so that they understand exactly what is this?
It's just to give an idea. It means for the judiciary to be able to make certain decisions themselves, which relates to the operations of the courts, without having to depend on another arm of the state, the executive. It relates to, for example, the appointment of personnel. At the moment, and I've said this a few times, if we want to appoint personnel for courts, we can't do that without the involvement of a member of the executive, the Minister of Justice. If we want to have more courtrooms, we don't have the power to decide that there should be more courtrooms. It's up to the executive to make that decision. If we want to have more judicial posts, because we realize that there is a lot of work, backlog, and so on, we depend on the executive. At the moment, there have been reports in the media about the situation in the Gauteng High Court. That has been that problem which is in the Gauteng High Court has been with the Labour Court for the past 2-3 years already. So there are those problems.
So would you then attribute some of these difficulties? In fact, that would be my next line of question, looking at the backlog, that, I mean, it could take, other experts are saying it could take as long as 10 years to conclude some of the cases. Do you attribute some of these difficulties, Chief Justice, to some of the engagements that are not really fruitful with the executive?
What I'm saying is that some of the decisions that need to be made, if the power was with the judiciary to make those decisions, we would be able to make those decisions much quicker than the executive. They seem to take long to make decisions. We are dealing with issues that we deal with every day in terms of the operations of the courts. We see the challenges when people's cases have to drag on for a long time because there are not enough judges, there are not enough courtrooms, and so on. If we have to make those decisions, we would make those decisions faster. Obviously, where the problem is money, it doesn't necessarily mean that once the issues are with us, there would be money if there was no money when the issues were with the executive. But obviously, we would need to prioritize the way we see best for the judiciary and the operations of the courts. But at the moment, as long as we have to approach the executive and ask them to do this and that, and they take ages to make decisions. In the meantime, the public suffers because matters take long.
Yeah. On the delay in terms of taking decisions, but there's also an accusation against the judiciary itself to say sometimes judgments take very long, which, you are accusing of the executive of taking long, but there's also a counter to say sometimes it takes very long to deliver judgments. So how do you respond to that?
There are cases where a particular judge has no valid reason for having taken long as long as he or she took to give a judgment. But there are many cases where the reason why judges are taking long in order to give judgments is because they are overworked. For example, if a particular court, because of the workload, should have 5 judges, but instead it has 2 judges, that means 2 judges are doing the work of 5 judges. Yeah. And therefore you are going to end up with that situation because there is just too much work. But if you have more judges, then the burden is shared, and then it's easier to deliver judgments timelessly. So the response is not to say all judgments that are delayed too long is because of the executive not filling posts and so on. There are some where there is no valid reason, and those should be dealt with by way of the Judicial Conduct Committee. Complaints should be laid. But there are many cases where the reason is simply that judges have got too much work.
And then looking at that area of judges having too much work, and also looking at how some of the issues, particularly, I think I want to speak about, I was just thinking of the case of Mbeje, for example. To an ordinary person, and then we've had to change judges, they don't necessarily understand that something that happened 10 years ago is still ongoing, and there is no reason, or we don't even know when it's going to end. So how do you then convince the public that justice is being served? In fact, I think you legal people normally say justice delayed is justice denied. So in a case like Mbeje, for example, so how do you then justify that kind of a situation?
No, but you see, it's very important that, particularly with regard to cases that are ongoing, such as the Mbeje trial, it's very important that the public be given the correct information. And we all know the correct information. The correct information is, before a criminal case is taken to court, there must be a police investigation. The judiciary doesn't get involved in the investigation. It's the police that get involved, maybe to some extent the NPA in certain cases. We know that the Mbeje case took a long time before it came to court. So if you look at the number of years, the years that really were the delay have nothing to do with the judiciary. No. That's number one. Number two, once the matter is before the court, the parties are the NPA, the prosecutor, and the defense. They decide how many witnesses they are going to call, and the judge has to listen to that evidence. The judge can't say, don't call that witness, you know. So as long as the lawyers, the NPA and the defense have witnesses to call, the judge has to listen, is listening. So that is what has been happening.
In your vantage point, what would be your advice to the judiciary, to the executive, to try and resolve this issue? You are at a very advantaged position now that you are partly out of the system, but as we've said, the judge never retires.
Well, I think you are referring to these problems that you are talking about.
Yes, problems that we are talking about, yeah.
One, the institutional independence. The executive must give serious consideration to cooperating with the judiciary, the leadership of the judiciary, towards and having meetings to discuss and finalize the discussions on institutional independence and a judiciary-led court model for the administration of courts. That's number one. Number two, while that is going on, there needs to be a lot of cooperation between the executive and the judiciary in order to make sure that ultimately the public who use the courts are served well.
Well, one of the reasons you are one of the very well-known judges is the recent role that you played, I think from 2018, that of being the chairperson of the Zondo Commission, state capture. Of course, it was supposed to take, I think, 12 months.
6 months.
6 months, 12 months, ended up taking more than 4 years. More than 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah.
Actually. So, and there were a lot of things that came out there. And you also made a number of recommendations because there's a lot that came out. So we have seen some movement in that regard. But are you satisfied that the authorities are handling the issues from the state capture seriously or with the agency it deserves?
No, it's not with the agency they deserve. The pace is quite slow, and we are still to hear, as far as I know, as to what decisions the president has taken on certain critical issues relating to structures that should be put in place to fight corruption. You will recall that one of the recommendations that the Commission had made, which was quite a critical recommendation, was that of the establishment of an anti-corruption procurement agency, anti-corruption agency, which was going to focus on the area of tenders and procurement, because that's where the real corruption comes from. My recollection is that when the president responded to the recommendations of the Commission in 2022, October 23, he indicated that there was a task team that would look at various possible structures. I'm not aware that it has finalized its job. I think that is the council, anti-corruption council, that he established. So we wait to see what structures he decides upon that will fight corruption. So the pace is not what it should be.
So given that the pace is not what it should be, and you having had the first, the front row seat into seeing how it all happened, is there a possibility that it may somehow recur?
No, I think there is a possibility. As we speak, we have not put in place a mechanism that could help stop state capture if we realize it was emerging. A lot of what can be done relates to law enforcement, to criminality.
Yeah.
But that comes after people have committed a crime. It doesn't come before.
Yes.
So one of my concerns, which I've made clear publicly before, is that when we were investigating state capture, one of the things we had to look at was if we established, as we subsequently did, that there had been state capture, we had to look at how it had come about. In other words, were there weaknesses in our systems which made it possible to happen?
Yes.
And we would then need to say, what measures should we put in place to make sure that in the future it doesn't happen again? Now, you will recall that one of the ways in which state capture of the Guptas and Mr. Zuma happened was that when opposition parties in parliament said, there seems to be this Gupta family that is alleged to have undue influence on the president. Parliament should set up a committee to have public hearings and investigate. The majority rejected those motions, the majority being the ANC. When opposition parties said, look, the evidence about state capture has been mounting, and the president, there are lots of allegations against the president, we should pass a vote of no confidence in him. The majority turned that down, the ANC. In that way, state capture was allowed to continue. If the public hearings, investigations that the opposition parties had called for had been allowed to happen, the state capture may have been stopped before a lot of money of taxpayers was stolen. But because they were not stopped, it was not stopped, more money was stolen over the years. So now the ANC doesn't have majority status in parliament anymore, and therefore on its own will not be able to stop any attempt to have public hearings and so on. But it would need the assistance of other parties in order to have the majority. But the question that arises for me in my mind when I look at Parliament, I see a lot of people against whom findings were made in the commission who are in Parliament, and I wonder whether it's coincidental or whether there is any attempt by anybody to weaken Parliament. And we know that the way that the state capture of the Guptas and Mr. Zuma was working, it worked on the basis of weakening institutions so that they would not do the job they are supposed to do. So I get worried to say, is it possible that there is an attempt to weaken Parliament? I mean,
you've just mentioned the ANC basically allowing this to happen. So would you say, and looking at what is happening currently in Parliament, I guess you're speaking mainly from the ANC, but I think it will be also from the other parties.
It can be, yeah, I've said before that, that I think the ANC is not the only party that would take the position that if the president comes from our party, we would not allow him or her to be voted out by way of a no confidence motion. I think there are other parties who would do the same if they were in the majority. I don't think the ANC is the only one.
But just to clarify this once and for all, Judge, so in your view, as matters stand, this in terms of the status of what was recommended in the state capture, the possibility that it may recur is very much alive.
It exists. Because just think about what I've just said now.
Yes. Yeah.
What the Guptas said, they captured the head of state. The head of state captured his own party.
Yeah.
And then the party, the majority party, made sure that the members of parliament would not vote the head of state out of office.
Because
Same thing can still happen.
Because you have, as obvious as the former head of the executive, you have to have relations with the head of the executive, which is the president. So have you raised these issues to say, Mr. President, if you are this slow, what we've just dealt with is likely to come back?
Well, I haven't spoken to the president directly, but he has got my report. He has got my report. I made recommendations of what should happen.
But you do meet with him, so
I do meet with him, but
don't you sometimes?
I don't have to raise. I don't have to raise that. If he wants to ask me about anything, he would be free to ask me. But I've spoken publicly.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's aware of what I've said publicly. So
you've also touched on the, I think, GNU as you were. I mean, you were not saying it in those
in
words.
express terms. Yeah.
Yes. So, do you think, as a country, will we be better served in terms of dealing with issues of malfeasance and corruption that we are now having many parties governing, or perhaps it will just fragment and stop service delivery? I know that as a judge, if you're an active judge, it was going to probably be difficult because those matters will still come before you.
Yeah.
But now I'm sure you have a bit of freedom.
Well, look, I don't know. We will have to wait and see how the GNU operates. But the one respect in which the fact that the ANC got less than 50% in the elections, and therefore it had to cooperate with other parties. The one part which I think is helpful is that, as I understand it, it has made it possible for more parties other than the ANC to chair certain portfolio committees. In the past, I think you had just only Scopa that was chaired by a member of the opposition. But if I'm not mistaken, I think now you have more. So I think that helps. But in terms of how it is going to work, I think we have to wait and see.
Maybe just to round up on the state capture related questions. Any regrets, perhaps how you handled it? I mean, you are a human being. When you've sat down, you will probably say, maybe I should have done A, B, C, or D.
No, I have no regrets. The one part which I have sometimes reflected on is where the Constitutional Court criticized me that I had been effectively too patient with Mr. Zuma. But even upon reflecting on that, I'm satisfied that knowing what I knew at the time, the way that I handled it was the right way, and I wouldn't handle it any differently. And the way I handled it produced the outcome that we had. Now, the outcome, I must just clarify that. What I mean is that Mr. Zuma was not able to say with any credibility that the commission treated him unfairly. He says so himself, but as far as I'm concerned, nobody can give credence to that.
Maybe just to interject there, given the aftermath of obviously that original decision going to jail and the July riots. So all those are linked. So don't you think it's the way of the public saying we actually don't agree with what Judge Zondo did?
Well, I don't know about whether they agree or not, but you see, as a judge, you take an oath to apply the law to make decisions in accordance with the Constitution and the law and the evidence before you. And you have got to do that with integrity, without fear, without favor, without prejudice. And everything that was done there, both by myself and the Constitutional Court, was done exactly in accordance with our oath of office. And I am proud that the judiciary of South Africa, when tested the way it was tested, dealt with the matter in the way it dealt with it, because it was in accordance with the Constitution. It is how any litigant would have been dealt with who did the same thing. We were saying we are all equal before the law and nobody is above the law.
How concerned were you when you witnessed those riots, the destruction, knowing that this was somehow linked to to the work you were doing?
Well, I was concerned about the destruction of property. I was concerned about the criminality. I was concerned about the people being intimidated and assaulted and so on and so on. But the real truth is that the executive failed to come on board on time and protect people's property on time. Prior to Mr. Zuma going to jail, it was in the media, it was in social media. People were saying all kinds of things of what was going to happen. There were people who were gathering at Nkandla, crowds of people who were saying all kinds of things about what they would do. So the executive was aware of what was likely to happen, and they just didn't do their job on time. The law enforcement agencies were nowhere to be found. There was a period of about, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 days, when it felt like, there was a coup going on, because you didn't see the president, you didn't see the Minister of Police, you didn't see the Minister of Defense, and all you could see on television was malls being on fire and people stealing. And I was saying, where is the president? Where is the Minister of Police? Where is the Minister of Defense? So there was 2 or 3 days, if you go back, when they were quiet, and those who were behind those riots, those who were behind what was happening, were feeling that they were gaining ground. I genuinely, at some stage, felt, I hope that, the president and the Minister of Police and Minister of Defense are fine, because it was like, have they been kidnapped? It was very worrying, but the fact that they were not seen publicly doing something about this gave momentum to those people to feel like we are succeeding.
I think, one of the threads I'm picking from, I think you, Judge, as you reflect, and even your public statements, because you're very public on so many areas, you're very critical of the executive. And I'm sure you feel it needs to perhaps do things a bit more differently, or perhaps be more responsive. Is that your attitude?
Well, put it this way, there's a lot that the executive has done well, and I say that all the time. There's a lot that has done well, but that doesn't mean where it has not done well, we shouldn't say so. Particularly where it concerns, possible violation of the constitutional rights of people. you see, because with regard to what was happening during the riots, it was a violation of constitutional rights of people, you see. So, but the executive has done, over the years, the housing, the electrification, the free education, there are lots of good work that they have done.
Chief Justice, on the next chapter now, I think you've also been a very good proponent of the empowerment of women, and then you have been succeeded by a very capable woman in Justice Mandisamaya. But perhaps just going back a little, when those JSC interviews happened, interestingly, she was the one recommended, but of course we know that the final decision is with the president. When she was recommended, given that you've always advocated for women advancement as well, so how did that make you feel? So didn't you feel perhaps let her take the chair? How did it feel? Just go through that moment.
Well, I called her. After I had the recommendation, I congratulated her on being recommended. Yeah. And I told her that if she was appointed, I would give her my full support. That's what I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't you feel like perhaps, let me just step aside, because anyway, I was left with 2 years before I left the bench?
Well, what I had done is present myself and leave it to those who had to make the decision as to whether it should be me or somebody else. So I presented myself. I said at the interview that if somebody else was appointed, I would give them, whoever they are, I would give them my full support. And I understood that that was the attitude of each and every candidate. Indeed, as I was subsequently appointed by the president, I can say that all those candidates have given me tremendous support during my term of office. Justice Madlanga, Judge President Mlambo, in the heads of courts meeting, of course, the current Chief Justice. So I think we were all prepared that whoever got appointed we would support.
Going towards a conclusion, what do you think is the misconception about you? I mean, people will say so many things, but and then sometimes people will say things that that is not me. But from what you've seen from the people, what do you think is the misconception about you as Judge Zondo?
I don't know. Maybe I just haven't heard what they say about me. I don't know what it is that I can say. People think of me that's a misconception. I was trying to think when I saw that one of your questions was that one. Maybe you can tell me some of the things they say about me.
I wouldn't use the word captured because I think that's too strong a word in this context.
Yeah.
But there is that allegation that your proximity to the president makes you perhaps being a bit more soft on him.
No, it's just nonsense. That is something that is said is perpetuated by people who have issues with me arising out of the commission. You must just look at people who say that. It's people who have issues with me arising out of the commission. I called the president to come and give evidence to the commission. By calling him, and he agreed, by calling him to the commission, I was calling him to put him on the spot where the evidence leaders could question him on any issue and question him intensely. I brought him to the commission to do that. I could also do that. And I asked him questions. The evidence leaders asked him questions. I didn't protect him to say, hey, the evidence leaders are going to question him too much. He came and he was questioned. I've given a judgment where in the Constitutional Court, I was the only one who gave a judgment against him. I was the minority. The rest of the judges found in his favor. I didn't think that he had acted correctly. That relates to the matter relating to those NPA officials who had been appointed by President Zuma just before he left to be a director of public prosecutions in Mpumalanga, Northern Cape, I don't know where else. So I concluded that the president had acted unlawfully in withdrawing their appointment, but I was in the minority. In the report of the commission, Mr. Koko had complained that the president, as deputy president then, had said that he should be fired. That is, Mr. Koko from ESCOM, he had complained that that was unlawful. The deputy president had nothing to do with that, about the firing of people at ESCOM. I found in favor of Koko on that point and against the president.
Well, I guess...
and actually, also in the report, I've criticized the leadership of the ANC, the top six, which includes him, for the way they failed to come to the assistance of the Popo Molefe board at PRASA after Mr. Molefe had told the ANC about the problems at PRASA. And there are a number of other areas where I said the leadership of the ANC should not have done this.
Well, finally, as you go and rest, you, with you, former President Zuma, you are both now retired. Are we going to be seeing the relations being restored, given that at some point we were told that you were friends?
No, we were never friends. I don't know about you, but I asked simple questions. I mean, it's common cause between me and Mr. Zuma that he has never been to my house. He has never been to any of the places where I've stayed in Gauteng and Durban. Whenever there is a death in my family, he has never come or been told about it. When there's a death in his family, I've never been told or gone to the funeral. So what kind of a friend is that?
Well, I guess as retired...
but we know each other. I've always said we know each other. And whenever we met, we would have a brief conversation because we know each other and a pleasant conversation. Well,
thank you very much, former Chief Justice. But of course, as we know, if you are a judge for life, unless you get impeached. So thank you very much for the opportunity. We hope we'll still be able to tap into your knowledge, your wisdom, and advice, because you'll now be an elder. So clearly, you'll also be a bit more relaxed in terms of giving us an insight into what is happening.
Thank you very much.
So we really appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was the retired Chief Justice, Justice Raymond Zondo, who was speaking to us. Remember, at the end of last month, on the 31st of August, he officially retired after 12 years at the Constitutional Court, but of course, 27 years at the bench.